Hello, Year 5. It's time for history this afternoon and our second history lesson of a new topic. So today, all you're going to need is a pen or pencil and some colouring pencils and colouring pens as well. So if you need to get any of those, pause here and go and grab those bits and bobs. Okay, so today we're going to look at Mayan architecture. We're going to identify the key features of Mayan buildings, and we're going to create a scrapbook from a visit to a Mayan historical sites. Before we do that, let's total recall some of the stuff that we did last week, and let's see if we can remember by filling in some of these gaps. The Mayan civilization was in Central, or there's another name for it, MA. What's that one there? The Mayan eras were Classic, then PC and PC. What are those gaps there? Mayans were devoted to Pocketok, a game or sport that was like what other sport? And the Mayan civilization ended when conquistadors arrived from what country did they come from? So pause and have a go at filling in those gaps. And here come the answers. The Mayan civilization was in Mesoamerica, a small section of America just north of Guatemala and Honduras. The Mayan eras were Classic, Pre-Classic and Post-Classic. Pocketok is a sport similar to football, and the conquistadors arrived from Spain. Let's recap some of what we came up with last week then and what we said about the Mayan history and the Mayan timeline. The Mayan civilization. The Maya occupied a vast area covering southeast Mexico and the Central American countries of Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and parts of El Salvador. Mayan culture began to develop in the pre-classic period around 1000 BC, or sometimes BCE, and was at its heyday between 300 and 900 CE. Heyday means your very best days. So the best days of the Mayan Empire were between 300 and 900 AD, sometimes known as CE. The ancient Maya were well known for their writing, of which a great part can now be read. It was for the most part deciphered in the second half of the 20th century. You might know the meaning of that word, deciphered, because it links to some of the computing I remember us doing last topic. It means to decode, to unlock really, and find the meaning of. They were also known for their advanced mathematics, astronomy, and calendrical calculations. That means calculations relating to the calendar. Despite sharing a common history and certain cultural attributes, ancient Maya culture was extremely diverse, largely to the range of geographic and environmental conditions in which it developed. So today we're going to study the Mayan architecture. Now, what do we mean by architecture? Well, architecture means buildings. It's the range of houses, palaces, temples, churches, granaries, breweries, all these kind of buildings that are built by people. Ancient architecture, this is buildings from a long time ago. Ancient architecture is a great historical source, a great historical clue. It gives us an insight into ancient worlds that we don't necessarily have the same kind of insight into that we would have for more recent history. So what do you think we can learn from an ancient building? If a historian comes across an ancient piece of architecture, an ancient building, what clues can they decipher from it? What kind of lessons can they learn? Pause here, just have a little think about that. Did you say any of this? They can tell us how people lived, the types of houses they lived in, the kind of ways that their day-to-day life went about. They tell us a lot about their religious beliefs often. It's very common that the pieces of ancient architecture that are found are temples, churches, religious sites. It can tell us what they did for fun. So sometimes we can find amphitheatres or sports arenas. They can tell us what they ate and drank. If we find certain marketplaces that are used for selling fish, we know that they ate a lot of fish. If we find wine stores, we know that ancient culture drank wine. We can learn about a hierarchy, and this means the levels of importance that people lived in. So if we find an ancient civilization with some very, very big grand houses like palaces, and then some very small, very basic houses. This tells us that that society had a hierarchy where richer and more important people lived in big, salubrious surroundings, whereas poorer people lived very basically. It tells us about the hierarchy. Now today we're off on our holidays. You might remember last week I went on a little bit of a virtual holiday. Well, come and join me on one today. We're all off on a 5,000-mile journey. Well, we've made it. That was quite a flight, wasn't it? I hope you're ready to go with your partner. You've got your sun cream on. Don't forget your packed lunch, because we're off for a little visit to Chichen Itza today. We're starting here by the, I'll take my sunglasses off or I'll fall in, by the cenote. We'll find out a little bit more about that later. But let me take you up this way to the start of our visit. We're going to turn around and head on up the path here. Now, whilst we're wandering along, you might be tempted to pick up a souvenir. So if you want to spend some of your pocket money now, here's your opportunity. There's some of the local people here selling some of their incredible crafts. You can see some, pick yourself up a fantastic plate for mum and dad. We're going to keep going though. We've got lots of historical architecture to have a look at today. So we're going to keep heading up here. Ooh, might be time for a new pair of sunglasses actually. I'll have to stop in there on the way back. We're getting closer and closer as we head on up the hill towards the city itself. I know it's hot, but keep going because we're nearly there. In fact, through the trees now, we're getting our first glimpse of this historic site. And here we are, under the beating sun, amongst the trees in the city of Chichen Itza. Now we're going to congregate here, just round the corner, in the middle of the square, just in front of El Castillo, the Temple of Goldkhan. And here's where I'm going to leave you. Here's where I'm going to let you go and wander off. Don't get lost, and make sure you're back by 12 o'clock. All you need to do is click on the Google Maps link that's down in the description. And using the Street View controls, have a little wander around the historical site. So if you double click where you want to go, it'll take you, and then click and hold, and you can have a really good look around and get up and close to the ancient architecture. See what you can discover. I give yourselves about 5-10 minutes to have a wander around, and then when you're ready, come back to the video and we'll see what we've been looking at. Well, we're back year 5. What a trip. I didn't think much of the hotel, but the excursions were pretty good. I hope you enjoyed that little day out and had a decent wander around and discovered some interesting things. What were we looking at then? Well, we started by looking at the Temple of Goldkhan in the center of Chichen Itza. This is maybe the most famous Mayan site. This temple to the serpent god was built around 1000 AD, but it wasn't rediscovered until 1880. This is important because the end of the Mayan civilization we know happened in the 16th century, and it wasn't until the 19th century that somebody stumbled upon this in the middle of the jungle. And as you can see in the picture, it's completely overgrown. And historians painstakingly took all the vegetation off, and you were left with this unbelievable temple. And the more that the historians looked at it, they came to understand the Maya in greater detail, because they realized that the temple had been specially constructed in a very specific place so that the serpents down the bottom of the stairs, twice a year, at the point of equinox, when the Earth experiences its shortest day and longest day, the sun falls at sunset to create a giant snake slithering down the temple in shadow and sunlight. Also, fascinatingly about the Temple of Goldkhan is that there are 91 steps on each of the 4 flights of stairs. And if you add 91 to 91 to 91, 91, 4 lots of 91, 364. And then you add the final step up to the top, you get 365. Now, I'm hoping, year 5, that you're thinking, I know about 365. I remember that from our space topic because it takes the Earth 365 days to complete one orbit of the Sun. So 1,000 years ago, it appears that perhaps the Mayans had some understanding of this already. Now, there's other fascinating things to find out about the Temple of Goldkhan. It's actually 4 temples in one. There's temple underneath temple, underneath temple, underneath temple, all built on another giant cenote, a underground reservoir. But it's not the only interesting site at Chichen Itza. We can also find, and I wonder if any of you stumbled across, the Great Ball Court. This court for the playing of Pocatok was a very significant site in the city. There was a temple at either end, and the court is famous for its incredible acoustics. So this is its properties related to sound. In fact, you can hear someone whisper from the very far end of the court. Acoustics were quite important to the Mayans, and it wasn't until recently that tour guides at Chichen Itza discovered that the temples, a lot of the temples, have sound reflective qualities. So they discovered that if they stand in just the right spot in front of the temples and clap their hands, the sound echoes perfectly back to them like a musical note. Now, scholars believe that the game of Pocatok played at the ball court was played for very high stakes. In fact, some believe that the losing captain was decapitated at the end of the game. Did you see all the columns? Did you find that site where there were hundreds of lined up columns in a row? Well, then you found yourself at the Temple of the Warriors. This is another large step pyramid with rows of columns that were sculpted so as to look like warriors. And some of the other columns were sculpted to look like serpents. So we start to understand that snakes and serpents had an important part in Mayan folklore. At the top of the staircase, in front of the temple, is a chakmul, the reclining man figure that we see in other Mayan sites as well. And this was one that when historians were looking at this site, they were making comparisons with other sites in the Mayan world for having very similar statues. There are 3 areas with many rows of columns close to the Temple of the Warriors. Now, originally these columns would have held up a roof. This is probably a straw roof, a sort of thatch roof that has obviously decayed and disappeared over time. It's believed that these columns supported a huge meeting hall, and this tells us more about the Maya, doesn't it? It tells us that they like to gather in big numbers. They had some kind of celebrations within these meeting halls, perhaps. Did anyone find the Tzompantli, the Wall of Skulls? Well, this is a slightly gruesome spot in Chichen Itza. You see, the Mayans practiced human sacrifice. So a way of worshipping their gods was to take people's lives as a sacrifice, as a gift to the gods. When they did this, they placed the heads of the sacrificial victims on top of the Tzompantli, or the Wall of Skulls. Upon the wall are carvings showing images of human sacrifice and images of eagles eating human hearts and skeleton warriors with shields and arrows. And clearly the Mayans had some belief in an afterlife and in sort of tales of the dead. And here we are back where we started our journey at the Cenote Sagrado. Now, dotted all over the Yucatan Peninsula are cenotes. Now, these aren't truly pieces of architecture because they're natural phenomena. These natural sinkholes are bodies of underground water all over the peninsula. And this one, about 60 meters across, is surrounded by cliffs in almost a perfect circle. Through years of historical work, scholars have found that it's full of precious objects, shells, jade carvings, pieces of obsidian, black glass, cloth and gold, as well as human sacrifices, human skeletons found at the bottom as well. So that completes our day at Chichen Itza. It's time to record some of those memories so that we can look back on them in years to come. I'd like you to create a scrapbook page from a visit to Chichen Itza. Bronze is to identify the key features of some of the Mayan buildings in your scrapbook. Silver to use some persuasive language to really celebrate and make a big show of success about your day there and the Mayan architecture that you saw. Gold is to make some comparisons with some other historical sites that you have been to. So these might be sites that you pretend you've been to and you do a little bit of research online. We're going to aim to make our page colourful, imaginative and informative. So have a little look at what this might look like. So here's my day at Chichen Itza. I've drawn a simple picture of the Temple of Goldkhan there. And here's the text that I've included. Wow, what an incredible day. We're tired out from all the walking, but the ruins were amazing. The best part was the Temple of Goldkhan. It's a huge pyramid built 1,000 years ago, but they knew what they were doing. They built it so that the sun creates a snake shape at the equinox. Pretty clever. The Great Ball Court was amazing. Did you know that the game of Pocketot was more of a religion than a sport? Sompantli is the Wall of Skulls. It's where the Mayans put the skulls of people after they were sacrificed. Kind of scary, huh? Did you know a cenote was a sacred underground reservoir of water? Archaeologists have found precious objects in them. So that's just a starting point with some short paragraphs about each of the areas that we saw. It might be you want to focus more on one and do a bit more detail about the Temple of Goldkhan. It might be that you would like to describe the other sites that we saw. Now, if you wanted to do the goal, I just want to show you a few ideas of other points of comparison you could make. You could talk about some other step pyramids in the world. Temple of Goldkhan is a step pyramid. You could make comparisons to your trip to the step pyramid of Zoser in Egypt, which is built 3,000 years before the Temple of Goldkhan at Chichen Itza. It's a lot more basic. How does it compare? What's the site like? Maybe you want to make some comparisons with some Greek temples that you could research. Maybe you want to see if there are other cenotes in the world. So that's the goal, to try and find some other sites. And you might have to do a bit of research yourself to find some other sites that you could make comparisons to. Okay, so I'll leave a task up there for you. And if you wanted to use my waggle, you can always pause back there if you need it. And I'll see you soon for another lesson. Bye-bye, year 5. Go out.